Hey, besties. Thank you once again for tuning into the Bought podcast. I am so excited because if you're listening, that means we have officially launched. Thank you to every single one of you who has supported and loved on me as I was prepping and preparing to launch this podcast. I love each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. Today, we're going to do something a little different than what you may see in all of my episodes that are coming up. We are going to do a small Q&A. Some of you had left me questions that I'm going to get straight into, so stay tuned for more. Today's first question is going to be, how did you know that you wanted to start a podcast? It's so funny, and I'm going to be completely raw and honest with you guys. I actually did not want to start a podcast. Truth be told, it never crossed my mind. I never thought like, hey, let me start a podcast. It never came to me. But I was always the one that would listen to podcasts as I'm getting ready for my day. I would listen to podcasts while I'm doing work, sending my emails, typing and stuff. But I never once thought, let me start a podcast. And truth be told, I'm going to be a little transparent with you guys. I was in a season of my life where I felt as though I was on the verge of losing my mind. And it's so funny how this all played out. I was just sitting in there and I was at a point in my life where I just felt so numb and I felt so discouraged with life. And I was just sitting there and I heard a small, still voice say to me, start a podcast. And it was so random because I wasn't listening to a podcast, I was just sitting there. And I heard the small, still voice start a podcast. And I was like, what? Like, no. And I was sitting there like, God, is that you or is that me? And then as time progressed and days kept going, it just kept replaying, start a podcast, start a podcast. And I was like, you know what, God, this must be you. And eventually, I was doubting, and we're going to get into that another time. But I was doubting, and I was like, nah, a podcast isn't for me. Like, God, you know, I don't know nobody. Like nobody know me. Me start a podcast. Who am I gonna talk to? And I was in that season of my life where I felt like I was about to go crazy. Like I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was losing myself mostly. And I was like, God, I can't even look myself in the mirror and tell myself something and you want me to tell other people stuff? Nah. That is how I knew, quote unquote, that I wanted to start a podcast. I didn't know I wanted to start a podcast, but God told me to. Okay, so the next question is, why did you start your podcast? Truth be told, I went almost 2 months after God had told me to start a podcast without doing it, and I wasn't quite obedient. I was just like, you know what? Start a podcast, that's not for me. I'm gonna just run away from it. um, I eventually started because, God kept tugging on me, like, start a podcast, start a podcast. And a funny story is I eventually told my mom and I'm like, um, I'm gonna start a podcast. It was so random. We were in Hobby Lobby and I just randomly poured it out like I'm gonna start a podcast. And she was so excited for me and I was like, um, thank you. I didn't know much to do with it because I thought she was going to say, you know what, Mani, this isn't for you right now. This isn't your time to start a podcast. Like, you need to focus on you and work on yourself. But she was so excited, like, yes, and hyping me up. And I was like, you know what, maybe I need to take this and run with it. And I ended up telling the people that are closer to me, like, hey, like, I'm interested in starting a podcast. And they were also encouraging. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I was hoping one of y'all would have told me, like, hey, Monty, a podcast isn't for you. But everyone encouraged me. And I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I can't keep running from it. Like, if this is what God really wants for me, it's time that I step out and actually do it. Because hopefully, this podcast can benefit someone or encourage someone in their walk with Christ, as this podcast has encouraged me already. Because, truth be told, I never seen myself doing a podcast. If anyone knows me, those who do know me on a personal level would understand and know that I dislike, strongly dislike attention. I hate when the focus is solely on me. I hate talking in large crowds. And for me to start a podcast, this is something completely out of my comfort zone. So God knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. Okay. The next question is, what inspired the podcast name? I love this question, honestly, because I haven't really explained the full meaning behind the podcast name. And obviously, as you all know, the name of the podcast is called The Vault Podcast. And it's so funny because as I was talking to God, like, okay, you want me to start a podcast? I need a blueprint. I need an outline. I need everything. Give me a template. You know, if you want me to bake a cake, I need the ingredients. I need the eggs. I need the batter. I need everything. Like, you want me to bake this cake? Provide me with it. Like, these were the conversations that I would have with God. And after a while, once I decided to actually step out and start the podcast, I'm like, okay, God, you want me to start the podcast? What do you want me to talk about? Like, what am I gonna even call this thing? Like, I can't make up a name. And he eventually told me the vault. And I was like, okay, the vault. Okay, nice. Like, why the vault? Like, next, the vault. Okay, what's next to that? Like, what's the meaning behind it? Like, what do you want me to talk about? And for a few days, it felt as if God was silent. Like, okay, you gave me the name. You started to download in me what you wanted me to talk about, the topics, the people that you want me to reach, but I don't know anything else. Like, what more am I supposed to do with the vault? Like, how am I supposed to reach people with this name? And a few days, it felt like God was silent. Like, I was like, God, is you really up there ignoring me at this point? Like, I asked you a whole question. And after a while, I was like, okay, I'm really stepping out to do this podcast. Maybe I can do a little research and help with it, you know? And I started searching up the purpose behind a vault because you would see it in banks and establishments, but what is the real purpose behind it? And as I was doing research on Google, it says that a vault is typically used to hold assets. It is typically used to store things of value in a safe and secure place. And I'm like, okay, okay. So you want me to call my podcast The Vault because you want me to store things of value. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting somewhere. I'm getting somewhere. And as I continued to speak with God about it, I was like, okay, you're giving me the blueprint. You're giving me the outline. You're giving me the templates. You're giving me the topic. You're giving me the name. And now I did research to really find out what the purpose of this name is. So as I continued speaking with God, He ended up revealing to me that He wanted me to use this platform as a safe and secure place for you and I to have a place to process our pain, a place to process our emotions, a place to voice our opinions, to voice our feelings, to voice our life experiences. He wanted me to create a platform so that you and I can feel comfortable sharing these things that we never had the opportunity to share. And I was like, wow, okay, I understand. So the Vault podcast is a safe and secure place for you and I to feel heard, to feel like our voice is an asset, for which it is. Our God given voice is an asset to this world, and God wanted me to understand that because I went so many years being silent. And for those who do know me, who are tuning in, I love y'all. But for those who do personally know me, would understand that I was always the silent one. I was the one who always didn't say much. I would just sit around and observe, and I didn't have much of a voice because I didn't know how. I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't know how to speak up for myself. I didn't know how to speak on my emotions and on my feelings at times. And it affected me growing up because all of my childhood, I was always silent. I never spoke. And as I got older, I didn't know how to speak up for myself. So it kept me in a box, which is why it's so ironic that God is having me do a podcast, because it's completely opposite of what I grew up doing, talking for the most part. Everyone always thought that I was just this shy girl that was nervous around people, that had social anxiety, but I used to tuck so much under the rug to the point where when it came to me expressing myself, it was very difficult and uncomfortable. So the Vault podcast is going to bring that out of so many people so that everyone can understand that your voice is not something that should be hidden, because there's purpose behind your voice. That's why God gives it to each and every one of his children. So, someone also said, I am interested in starting my podcast. Also, what did you do to get started? I'm going to break this down into a few steps for you. Step one was doubt. But we're going to check that off of your list. Those who are actually interested in starting a podcast, we're checking that off of your list because we're past that and we're through that. But truth be told, I did doubt for a really long time. And I'm so thankful for those who are in my corner, because every time I doubted myself and got really discouraged, God used those people to remind me, like, hey, Monty, you're procrastinating. We're supposed to be working on your podcast. He would use those people to remind me whenever I felt down and discouraged about it. And I'm so thankful and appreciative for those people. And I'm going to holler at y'all and hit y'all up when the time comes. But step one was definitely doubt and discouragement. But eventually down the line, I learned that when it comes to doing something for Christ, when it comes to doing something that God called you to do, doubt and discouragement will always come up. It solely depends on how you handle it. Because when you're doing stuff that you want to do, you don't experience this doubt. You don't experience this discouragement. You do it with no problem at all. But when it comes to a calling from God, when it comes to a vision from God, everything rises up to try to break it down. So I hope that encourages you if you are listening. And for anyone else that is interested in starting a podcast, break down that wall of doubt, break down that wall of discouragement, because it's only there to attempt to hinder you from doing what God has actually called you to do. Honestly, if I let doubt and discouragement defeat me, I wouldn't be here talking to you all, and I'm so excited for further episodes. But for those who are interested in starting a podcast, check doubt off of your list. It might be step one on your list, but check it off because you're through it. Speak it. Speak it over yourself. I'm through doubt and I'm going to do what God called me to do. Repeat that. Step two was honestly research. So once I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm no longer going to be doubtful. I'm no longer going to be discouraged. I'm actually going to step out and do my podcast. I started doing research like on platforms that I can use, softwares for video editing and visual editing and audio. I knew that I didn't want to just do audio podcasts. I also wanted to include visual. So I started doing research on cameras. I started doing research on microphones and all of these softwares. That was step one. And being that I wanted to do visual, I wanted to have a nice setup. So I went on Amazon and started searching up sofas and wallpaper and carpet and decorations and stuff like that. That was honestly my step two. And I added a whole bunch of stuff to my save for later on Amazon. I know a whole bunch of y'all got that, but that's another day, another topic. Um, I added a whole bunch of stuff to my Amazon cart, and I was like, I'm getting this, I'm getting this, I'm getting that, I'm getting that. And then I started working on creating my logo. As you can see, for anyone who's watching the video, as you can see, I had created this logo on my own, and that's what I ended up doing. And I was like, okay, so God gave me the vision. He gave me the desire to start the podcast. He gave me the topics that He wanted me to discuss. He gave me the blueprint. He gave me the name. He gave me the outline. Now it's up to me to bring everything together. So after I created the logo, I eventually just stepped out and said, you know what? I'm going to take money and just buy everything that I need. And that's what I ended up doing. And then I created my studio setup. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. I have every single thing that I need. And the only thing left to do is record. And I even got discouraged in that because I'm like, oh my God, like I'm so nervous. Like, God, you gave me everything. And what if I mess up? And I was having so much anxiety because I'm like, God, like, what if I'm not consistent? Like, these are the thoughts that were going through my head. And I'm like, you know what? God, you got me. So I ended up stepping out and I started making small clips and playing around, trying to get comfortable speaking and playing around with my microphone and the softwares that I did research on. And I just tried to make it comfortable. And I just kept talking to God, like, if this isn't for me, just let me know now. Like, if you were joking, just let me know now. And those were like the conversations that I would have with God. And He's like, you got this. Like, I gave you the vision months ago. You got this. So after I started doing all of that, I just stepped out and I was like, time to sign up for my hosting site. And if you need help trying to decipher on which hosting site you want to use, send me a chat and I can definitely step out and help you with that. But I signed up for my hosting site and then I made my YouTube channel and then I made a small clip and uploaded it on my TikTok. And I am so appreciative to those who did support me and viewed and shared and loved and commented on my TikTok. And I was like, you know what? It's already out there. It's time to actually make the step and do what God has given me the vision to do. And at that point, I was like, you know what? God, it's all in your hands because I already brought it out there. I already told everyone I'm starting a podcast so that they can hold me accountable because if I kept it in my pocket, no one could hold me accountable. Like, hey, Monty, where's this podcast? You told everyone, you made it public. Where's this podcast? And that's, truth be told, that's honestly how I started my podcast. It was a long journey to the end, but that's how I started. So, the last question we're going to go over today is, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Honestly, that is a beautiful question. Honestly, I hope. I hope to see myself in a stable career, um, in real estate, most definitely, because that's been a huge desire for me as well. But that's another day, another topic. I hope to see, and the reason why I'm saying hope is because I'm honestly at a point of my life where I can't keep running away from what God has called me to do. And I came to the realization that God's plans that He has for me outweighs all of the plans that I have for myself. So I'm becoming content in that and I'm becoming humble with that. So I'm saying hope because I don't want to continue to step out and do the things that I want for myself. Because although some of the things that I'm doing are great, it's like, is that what you really want from me, God? So at this point in my life, I hope to see myself flourishing in my real estate career in 10 years and having real estate investments. But truth be told, in 10 years, I see myself in a more stable relationship with God. In 10 years, I see myself being more consistent in what He has called me to do and walking in my purpose. That's what I truly see myself in 10 years doing. But what I really want to see for myself, God, whatever you want me to do, I'm going to do. Because I can't keep running. And that goes for so many of you that are listening. We keep running from what God really has called us to do. And we're like, you know what? Next year, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. This, that, and a third. But it's completely not what God wants for you because His plans are much greater than our own plans. So at this point in my life, I don't want to make any plans for myself. I just want to go as God has called me to go, and I just want to walk down that path that He has called me to walk down. And I'm just going to be content and happy with that. But I hope, I hope to see myself in a stable career in my real estate career. And we're going to get into that, you know. And for those who are listening that personally know me are probably like, Monty, stop putting it off. Stop procrastinating with your real estate career. You know, I overthink everything, and I should have done that a long time ago. But, you know, I'm gonna just leave it at there. I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you that are listening or that may be watching. I love you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to further episodes with you all. Stay tuned, and thank you so much for watching.